Welcome. My name is Miriam Martinez, and I'm a professor emerita at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I'm really excited to be here with you today to learn more about children's literature, because children's literature has really been at the center of my research, my writing, and my teaching. I've also served on various award committees. For example, I was the subcommittee chair of the primary level for ILA's Children's and Young Adults Book Awards, and I've served on committees such as the Caldecott and the Cybert. And currently, I am one of the ILA representatives to USBBY. But now, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Wendy Stevens. Wendy is an associate professor and school library chair at Jacksonville State University, and she's the current president of the United Board of Books for Young People, which is USBBY. In addition to USBBY, she's a really active member of the American Library Association, the American Association of School Libraries, the Assembly for Literature for Adolescents of the National Council of Teachers of English, and the Children's Literature Assembly. She's also the past president of both the Alabama Library Association and the Alabama School Library Association. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Wendy Stevens.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I'm so glad to be able to join you all tonight. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about USBBY before we get started. It's our pleasure to have Miriam and also Brenda Dales, who you'll be hearing from a little bit later on our USBBY board as representatives from the International Literacy Association, one of our absolutely invaluable partners. And USBBY is the United States chapter of the International Board on Books for Young People, which was founded in the days after World War II by Lyn Miller-Lachmann, an activist who really felt that getting children messaging internationally was critical in promoting international understanding and forestalling future conflicts between nations. The mission of the International Board on Books for Young People is to promote that cross-national understanding, to give children everywhere the highest quality books, to encourage publications of quality children's literature, especially in developing countries, and to stimulate research and scholarly activity in the field of children's literature. If you're looking for a way to promote literacy internationally, it's a great mechanism for doing that. And many of the projects recognized by the International Board on Books for Young People, which include the Hans Christian Andersen and Reading Promotion Awards, focus on making those connections internationally. We also have a number of different projects and activities, including International Children's Book Day, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, a journal, Bookbird, and the Silent Books Project that we participate in as well. So we're one of many national sections. We have 4 patron organizations in addition to ILA, the National Councils of Teachers of English, the American Library Association, and the Children's Book Council are all invaluably patrons that support us getting international literature news to their members and having that representation on our board. Our mission is to promote reading material of literary merit for young people, to facilitate the exchange of information about books of international interest to young people, and to cooperate with our affinity organizations. We have memberships that represent 44 states. We are a membership organization. We would love to have you join us. Our flagship award is the Outstanding International Book Award, which I know our past chair, um, Rachel Roseberry is going to be speaking about that. I feel like we're in for such a treat because the Outstanding International Books list and also the Notable Books for a Global Society are both so critically important when in this moment of cultivating really high quality literature for young people. So I'm really pleased to be able to join both of these past chairs of those two really critical resources today. That and I also wanted to mention our regional Congress, which will be held in November in Boston across three different places in the city of Boston. We're going to be focusing on literature as activism and hope to see you there. If you can join us, I think it will be well worth that trip. And thanks again. If you want to know more about USBBY, feel free to get in touch. Thank you again, Miriam, for the invitation to speak with everyone and let them know a little bit more about our organization, hopefully their organization too.
Thank you very much, Wendy. And at this time, I would like to introduce Brenda Dales. Brenda is Professor Emerita and has taught children and young adult literature at Miami University of Ohio. She served on various book award committees, including the Caldecott, MBGS, the Outstanding International Books, and she's also currently a member of the 2026 Hans Christian Andersen International Jury. And as Wendy noted, she is one of the ILA representatives to USBBY. So Brenda, I will turn things over to you now.
Thank you, Miriam. I'm delighted to be here to share in this discussion regarding my passion in books for young people. And thank you, Wendy, for including information about USBBY's Outstanding International Books and ILA's Notable Books for a Global Society. I had the honor of being a previous committee member as well as former chair of Outstanding International Books, and the annual OIB lists are excellent ways to locate books available here in the US from around the world, either originally written in English or translated to English for classroom use or inspired reading. This annual list of approximately 39 to 42 books for grades pre-K 12 began in 2006, and a link to all OIB lists is available on the USBBY website at usbby.org. And this is on a handout which will be available at the conclusion of this webinar. And I also wanted to mention the Notable Books for a Global Society list, which is a list of 25 books that is selected annually. And there is a link to that list on my the handout that I prepared also. And I am pleased that two most recent chairs of OIB and NBGS Selection Committee can be with us today, Rachel Roseberry and Jeannie Fain, which Wendy also mentioned. Rachel Roseberry is the Associate Director of Young Adult Programs and Services at the New York Public Library. She began service on the Outstanding International Books Committee in 2022 and chaired during 2024 for the current 2025 OIB list. The book Our Beautiful Darkness, translated by Lyn Miller-Lachmann, was selected as part of this 2025 OIB list, which Lyn will include in her upcoming discussion. Jeannie Fain is a professor at the College of Education and director of the Multilingual Learners ELL program at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee. I had the honor of meeting Jeannie in 2022 when we were both members of the ILA Notable Books for Global Society Selection Committee. This was the year the book written by Lyn, Torch, was chosen for the 2023 NBGS list, and Lyn will be discussing this book as well. Jeannie went on to become the chair of the committee that selected the 2025 NBGS list. Please welcome Rachel and Jeannie.
Hi, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. Let me pull my slides up. Wonderful. So I'm delighted to be here to speak a little bit more about USBBY's Outstanding International Books Award list. Serving on this committee for the past 3 years, including one as most recent past chair, has been a deeply rewarding experience. This past year, I got to serve with all of the wonderful people whose photos you can see on this slide. Our committee chooses a list of 38 to 42 international books that are outstanding during a calendar year. These are for kids and teens, like Brenda mentioned, for grades pre-K to 12. The international titles are both translated titles and books published originally in English, as long as they originated or were first published outside of the United States. So briefly about our selection criteria, they are robust, although not all books need to meet all criteria. Our goal is that our list highlights the best children's and young adult literature from other countries, helps children in the United States see the world from other points of view, and helps to bridge cultural gaps. Although it's important for me to note here that not all international books bridge gaps. For some children in the United States, they provide familiar perspectives from shared cultures in a very affirming way. Here are some additional content and presentation considerations that we take into account during our review. And hopefully you've noticed I have a couple of books, images of book covers placed on these slides. We'll have a full cover collage at the end so you can see all of the wonderful titles that we selected this past year. Here's just, these covers are just a little teaser. So I'm going to briefly outline our review process so that you can know a little bit more about how books make it on this list and maybe encourage you to check them out. First, our goal is that we're reviewing and considering all eligible books. We actively reach out to publishers, both large and small, and typically receive around 400 books each year. All of these are read by at least 2 members of the committee and then nominated for full committee consideration if any member believes they meet our selection criteria. An important point I want to make is about equity in the material under our consideration. For many reasons in our selection pool, there sometimes is a bias towards original English titles published in the global north. Although many stories published in these countries are valuable, rich, and meet our selection criteria, it's wonderful, and notably they often represent a diasporic perspective. But while no book receives special consideration, my priority as chair was that books published from underrepresented areas were as fully and equitably under committee consideration as possible. We truly want to be a fully international list. And this means being actively engaged with the current scope of international literature brought into the United States from all of our wonderful publishing partners to ensure we receive all eligible titles for consideration. So these are some of the resources I use to keep on top of current international literature being published for young people, and I thought it might be interesting to folks on the webinar today. We appreciate all publishers bringing in international literature. I've highlighted a few here with a mission specifically around translated and international literature doing incredible work, but the names are not comprehensive. And I often encourage folks to read their catalogs of all publishers to be aware of what's coming out in a given year. I also recommend the Global Literature and Libraries Initiative, as well as the Building a Global Youth Literature Collection website, as well as #WorldKidLit, which has been an invaluable resource. This all is, of course, in addition to USBBY and USBBY, who I've found such wonderful resources from and have been inspired by before I joined the committee. As mentioned, all committee members recommend or nominate books that meet the criteria. We have lively virtual meetings to discuss these titles and then hold final deliberations in early December each year to identify our final list. Something we take seriously on OIB is reviewing with social responsibility in mind. I recommend Dr. Kathy Short's short article on the danger of reading globally, as well as her and Junko Yokoto's paper on global literature for young people, highlighting this idea of social responsibility. The first one I mentioned was published in Bookbird, which is an IBY publication. The committee regularly engages with literature from other countries and cultures, many of which are outside the realm of lived experience for individual committee members, certainly myself included. And I believe that our job is to conduct our review with that sense of social responsibility and an awareness of our positioning so that we can meet our intended goals to honor literature from the broadest possible range of global cultures and storytelling perspectives, ultimately widening the bridge of understanding between cultures, which is USBBY's mission. So then in partnership with School Library Journal, we publish our list. This is our 2025 list, published in February 2025 in the February issue of School Library Journal. I've included the PDF download in the Dropbox folder for today, as well as the PDFs from a few of the most previous years, although you can read all of the past outstanding international, or view all of the past outstanding international book list awardees on the USBBY website, as Wendy and I think Brenda may have mentioned. This is our beautiful list in cover collage form. I wanted to just put that out there. Every time I see it, it puts a smile on my face. I truly encourage everyone to read at least one of these titles. They're all exceptional. It could give you teasers about all of them, but I don't have enough time to do that. But, you know, from a story of the world's first democratically elected female president in Iceland, to a warm meal from grandma's rooftop garden in a town in Southwest China, to just this absolutely magical coming of age and magical realism story on an island off the coast of Colombia. It would be hard to name my favorite. But luckily, you will get to hear more from Lyn Miller-Lachmann later in this presentation, as Brenda mentioned, about a title she translated that is on this list, Our Beautiful Darkness. And the last thing I'll say is that title is a very special one. It is one actually for older readers. And like I said, our list is for pre-K to 12, but often we don't have any age range quotas for any of the titles. And we find that literature for young adults, some of the older titles, there are fewer of those. And it's a delight to be able to listen to Lyn talk about Our Beautiful Darkness, one of those titles for our teens on the list. But that is it for me, and I will now pass it to Jeannie to talk about the list that she has worked on.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me today. I'm going to talk a little bit about NBGS, the Notable Books for a Global Society 2025. I'm the current chair. Just a little bit about history about our particular committee is that we were actually formed in 1995 under the guidance of Yvonne Sue Runyon, who really took the whole idea of making sure that we could identify outstanding trade books that would really help promote understandings across the lines of culture, race, sexual orientation, values, and ethnicity. And then it was this committee was designed to create a list that would really help teachers and students and families really think through sort of a global perspective. Definitely, we think it is important to highlight books that have global perspectives, especially in our current climate with some of the challenging things we are navigating. In terms of our criteria, well, first off, we select 25 outstanding books. Similar to what Rachel shared, we have about 400, 500 books that come from publishers. We follow a similar selection criteria where we meet on a regular basis. In our particular committee, we actually have reading groups where we take turns in reading the novels, and then we nominate a book for everyone to read, and then to become an all read. We read all of the picture books, and then we have very intense conversations. We also have recently invited Spotlight Publishing came on to sort of highlight some of the newer books from some smaller publishers to make sure that we are highlighting some of the amazing smaller publishers that are out there, because we think all of our publishers, we want to make sure we're honoring the amazing books that are being put out. In terms of what we're thinking about in terms of our criteria, we really think about richness of detail in concerning groups. We're really looking at accuracy and authenticity and really trying to think through sort of the physical characteristics, economic status, and sort of a range of things. We really want to honor and celebrate diversity and just thinking through humanity and the in-depth treatment of issues. And then we're really thinking through sort of those authentic interactions among characters within and across groups. We also think it's really important to sort of make sure that we're being inclusive as we think through, sort of really trying to make sure that we're dismissing tokenism and sort of just biased perspectives of global perspectives. And we really want to make sure that we're thinking through a uniqueness of language or style. And we want to make sure the books have really high quality. And we do a lot of discussion about this. Sometimes when we talk about this, it seems like sort of an easy thing, but we do not always agree. We sometimes have very different perspectives. And I think that's really important because this is a place where we have dissent, and dissent is really critical when you're thinking through trying to find the most high quality books that you can find. We also want to make sure that books are appealing and enduring. We think that is really important. Here's sort of a look at some of the books that are up here. These are sort of our 25. We're a K-12 list. We do think through, trying to make sure that we have books that sort of hit that K-12. We don't keep track necessarily of how many we have kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but we do make sure that we're thinking through sort of, a global perspective. In our last list, we actually analyzed some areas that we need to keep thinking about this year. So we sort of set a goal for ourselves in terms of thinking through inclusivity and sort of what we're looking for. Our current amazing committee is here, and we think it's really important that this committee, we want to let you know that this committee is from ILA. It's part of the CLR SIG. The current president is Kathleen Howe, and I think I saw Sandeep's on here. She was our past amazing CLR SIG president. We want to make sure that, if you have any questions or if you're interested in joining our committee, you can definitely, email me. This is just an amazing committee to be on, and I'm super, thankful that I had an opportunity to talk about it. In conclusion, we really want to think about those diverse stories and really think about how we can dig deeper with teachers and peers and students. And as a reminder, we always want to make sure that we're, valuing and honoring stories that serve as positive mirrors, windows, and doors for all readers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rachel and Jeannie. We're now honored to hear from Lyn Miller-Lachmann, translator and author of books for children and teens. Lyn lives in New York City. She's a world traveler, and she's also lived in Portugal. She's fluent in Spanish and Portuguese. Not only was her YA historical novel Torch, which is set in the former Czechoslovakia, selected for the 2023 NBGS list, it also won the 2023 LA Times Book Prize. I believe this book fills a void here in the US in stories about this time and place in what is the former Czechoslovakia, now known as Czechia or the Czech Republic. She also translated the YA graphic novel Pardalita from Portuguese to English, which was a Batchelder honor book. The book she translated from the original Portuguese, which was selected for the 2025 book list, Our Beautiful Darkness, which Rachel gave us a little introduction to, is a very touching YA novella, originally written by Angola author Anjaki and illustrated by Antonio Jorge Gonçalves. According to Kirkus, Miller-Lachmann does a remarkable job of making this rich piece accessible to an English language readership. Please join me in welcoming Lyn Miller-Lachmann.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Brenda, and thank you to the USBBY and ILA committees for recognizing these books. And thank you to all of you for being here for this webinar today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how my experiences as an author and a translator work with each other in creating my different books. And, you know, it's basically a case of synergy. And I've illustrated here, there are 4 books that I've put up here. We've all mentioned Torch, Pardalita, and Our Beautiful Darkness have already been mentioned in the introduction. I also want to mention and express my gratitude to the ILA committee for Moonwalking, which was a notable book for Global Society in the same year as Torch, and is a verse novel, middle grade verse novel that I co-authored with Zetta Elliott. And each one of us took the voice of a 12-year-old in this story of an unlikely friendship between a white autistic boy who's a newcomer to the Williamsburg, Brooklyn neighborhood, where an Afro-Latinx graffiti art, science geek by day and graffiti artist by night. They befriend each other in a class and, you know, bond over their love of art and music in Brooklyn in 1982. So I basically have 3 themes that I feel are important to my writing. One of them is my obsession with history. I have always been fascinated by history. When I was growing up, I read everything that I could read about World War II, and also other wars. I tended to like reading about wars and their aftermath. And that was an interest that continued with my thinking about and writing about the Cold War. And I actually have 3 novels, historical novels, that touch on aspects of the Cold War. One of them was my YA debut, a book called Gringolandia. And it was set in Chile during the Pinochet dictatorship. The second one, besides Torch, which was kind of my second one, the third one is Eyes Open, which is a verse novel that came out last year and is set in Portugal during the Salazar dictatorship. And my second interest, or the second thing I wrote about, happened when, as an adult, I was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. Now, when I wrote Gringolandia, I did not know at that time that I was autistic, though I did know that I had a lot of trouble fitting in when I was growing up. And a lot of people thought I was very weird. And being diagnosed answered a lot of questions about why I did have trouble fitting in and following the rules, and why I was often bullied. And I think a lot of my interest in social justice issues comes from the fact that I was bullied and nobody really did anything about it except blame me. So when I was diagnosed, I pledged at the time that I would write a novel about somebody like me. And that was something I'd always avoided because it was very painful to face my past and the kind of person I was and the kind of things I experienced being undiagnosed autistic. And Rogue, which is a contemporary novel that came out in 2013, was my first attempt at writing an autistic character, with a girl, also undiagnosed, who's very much, her experiences, her desires, her needs were very much based on mine. So those were my first 2 books that I authored for young readers. I was not then a translator. I was very interested in translation. I read a lot of translated literature. I researched Gringolandia using original sources in Spanish because I was, at the time I was fluent in Spanish. And around the time that Rogue came out, as it was in production, my husband and I moved to Portugal. He had received a grant to teach a class at the University of Lisbon, and I went with him. And he was not very good with languages, so I took a class in Portuguese for immigrants, and was the one that sort of helped us get around Portugal. And he then was invited back to teach his class. He taught it in English because in the EU, a quarter to a fifth of all classes taught at universities must be taught in English. But we went back every year until the pandemic. So I spent a lot of time in Portugal. And one time when I came back from Portugal, I was at a meeting of PEN America. I'm a member of the PEN Children's and Young Adult Books Committee. And one of the speakers at that event was Claudia Bedrick, who is the editorial director of Enchanted Lion, one of the publishers that you saw in the OIB list, and publishes wonderful translations. She was looking for, she had mentioned at this meeting that she needed to find a translator for a book that she'd committed to publishing in translation, a book from Portugal called The World in a Second. And as I said, I'd just gotten back from Portugal and I raised my hand. And that's when I first became a translator for Enchanted Lion. And I've translated multiple books for them. At this point, three picture books with one that's coming out next year. And Our Beautiful Darkness, which is a young adult novel published by their new imprint, Unruly Books, their new chapter book or young adult imprint. One of those books that I translated is a picture book called 3 Balls of Wool Can Change the World. Now, I was very interested in history. When I lived in Portugal, I researched life in the country under the 48-year dictatorship of Antonio Salazar and his successor, Marcelo Caetano. And I found the original of 3 Balls of Wool that I read and I brought to Claudia as a possibility to translate. And this is a book that takes place in Portugal in the late 1960s. And the family has to flee the country because the right-wing dictatorship's secret police are about to arrest members of the family. So they flee the country in the middle of the night and end up in Czechoslovakia, where the father in this family had gotten a job. So they were living in Czechoslovakia, and at first they were really happy because in Czechoslovakia, unlike in Portugal during this time period, children could go to school. And all the children had enough to eat and a place to live. But what they did not realize is that people had no freedom and that there were things that people could not say. Nobody talked when they were outside because somebody could hear what they said. And if it was at all critical of the government, they would, just as in Portugal, they would be arrested. So the mother in this family is very upset. Both the parents are upset, but the mother comes up with a creative solution to express her creativity and to seize a little bit of freedom in an unfree society by knitting sweaters of multiple colors. And this catches on, And it became a metaphor. This book was a metaphor for the Prague Spring. And at the end of Three Balls of Wool, it's springtime, and it is the spring of the Prague Spring. So that ended up being one of the stories that influenced my decision to write Torch, was this particular book that I had translated that was written in Portuguese and starts out in Portugal before the family ends up in Czechoslovakia. Well, the Prague Spring did not last. In August of 1968, August 20th, 1968, Soviet tanks, backed up by tanks from other Warsaw Pact countries, invaded Czechoslovakia, put an end to all of the freedoms that the people had experienced over the past few months. In fact, over the past maybe a couple of years or so, very gradually, and then kind of all of a sudden when in spring 1968, when Alexander Dubček liberalized the regime and allowed for freedom of expression and some private enterprise and criticism of the government. Well, the Soviet Union was afraid that Czechoslovakia would leave the Iron Curtain, would slip out of the Iron Curtain, would leave the Warsaw Pact. And that's why he considered this a national security issue, and along with the other Warsaw Pact countries sent the tanks in, deposed Dubček, reimposed the censorship and the unfreedom, the kind of experiences that the young people in Torch experienced, where suddenly the books were taken off the shelves and they could no longer pass their rock music records around. And the newspapers that they were reading were no longer allowed to be published. And they once again had to be silent, or they could end up in prison, as in fact, one of the characters in Torch does end up in prison. Well, Burning Bush was in 2013, HBO Europe released the series. It was a mini-series called Burning Bush. And this mini-series was a chronicle of the decision by a young university student, Jan Palach, to set himself on fire in January 1969 to protest the Soviet invasion and occupation of Czechoslovakia and the Czech and Slovak people's passivity in the face of it. The fact that they had stopped protesting, the fact that they had just gone back to living the way they were, not having the freedom or the opportunity or the ability to speak out. So Burning Bush, and here are again some pictures of the tanks rolling through Prague during this in August 1968. And here is a picture of Jan Palach, who was 20 years old and a student at Charles University in Prague, and an 18-year-old high school student, Jan Zajec, who a month after Jan Palach set himself on fire, Jan Zajec did the same thing. He was a high school student from a town in the eastern part of what is now the Czech Republic, but then was sort of central Czechoslovakia, called Šumperk. And this last picture is a memorial to these two young men. Well, my character in Torch was also, like Zajec, Jan Zajec, was a high school student who believed that he was, as the third person who would do this, that he would be the one that would make the difference, that he would motivate people, knowing that these young people whose lives were ahead of them had so much life ahead of them, wanted freedom, did not want their lives from their youth to old age to be lived in slavery and under repression, that this would spark the rebellion. Unfortunately, it did not. Just as in the case of Jan Palach and Jan Zayats, the authorities repressed any mention of what my character Pavel did. And the only consequence was that these authorities now were pursuing their best friends. There were 3 other teenagers, all of them misfits in their unique way, who considered Pavel their best friend, but they were not friends with each other. And their ability to find each other and become friends and come to trust each other and create kind of a found family becomes not only a source of resistance in a country where friendships don't exist because anybody can betray anyone else, and the regime really incentivized betraying and betrayal. So to be a friend to someone else means not to betray that friend. And sticking together might, in fact, be, despite the fact that all of them were considered suspect and in danger by associating with each other, maybe their only key to survival. So the reason Torch really, in Burning Bush, which is, as I said, it was a mini series that takes off from the self-immolation of Jan Palach, but it did not really deal with the teenagers. It mainly dealt with the person who is featured on the film. Let's see, there it is a lawyer who helps the Palach family in a defamation suit that is a pretty hopeless suit, but it does raise awareness of the perfidy of the communist authorities. But the question I had in watching the film was, did Jan Palach have friends, and whatever happened to those friends? And that was the other thing that inspired me to write this story of the 3 friends of my teenager who set himself on fire and sacrificed his life in protest and in demanding a return to freedom and democracy. So here's some other research photos. I spent a lot of time in the Czech Republic and also in Slovakia. I went to Bratislava now that the 2 countries have gone through a divorce and are now each independent countries. So the first of these research photos is an image of a metal worker, a man who works with his hands, and it inspired the creation of a character, the father of one of the 3 friends, who is a former resistance fighter during World War II, but suffers from PTSD and has become an alcoholic. And he and his daughter live together following the death of his wife in childbirth. And they live on the fringes of society. And she has to quit school to make sure that her father gets to work. And he's a mechanic. This is a phone booth. I took this picture because a phone booth plays an important turning point role in Torch. One of my other characters, Tomasz, is the son of a high-ranking Communist Party official. But Tomasz, like me, is undiagnosed, but would today be considered on the autism spectrum. And so this was a case of a book, as was the case with Moonwalking, that I featured, that I not only, I have my obsession with history and also the fact that I am autistic, and put those two together in creating autistic characters who lived in the past, because people like us have always existed. And there is a time where he has to keep, his father is keeping tabs on him, and he's required to make a phone call at a certain time every single night. And one of those phone calls in Torch turns out to be rather traumatic. And this is what I imagine the phone booth looks like, that he was in this phone booth and his father had basically threatened, because he'd stepped out of line, his father had threatened him with institutionalization. This picture is the border. It's part of a museum that's designed to evoke the border, the barbed wire fence. In fact, there were 3 fences on the border. And those were originally, the communist authorities said, we need these fences to keep the imperialists from invading our country. The truth was, those fences were to keep the people in the country, so they would not take their education, because all of them were able to go to school. But the communist regime demanded that they stay in the country and not go find a better life in the capitalist West, or find a better life in a place where they would have freedom. So the 3 fences, the first one was a tripwire that alerted the authorities to the fact that somebody was trying to cross the border. So then the border guards would come and shoot the person. The second fence was an electrified fence. If you got past that first fence, the second one would deliver a lethal dose of electricity. And if for some reason that fence did not deliver its lethal dose of electricity, there was a barbed wire fence that would slow you down and probably cut you up. And it actually was not these simple barbed wires, but coiled barbed wires. So that was another. And then finally, the last photo, this slideshow seems to be doing what it wants rather than what I want it to do, is the rural area surrounding the town where this story takes place. The people in Torch live in this in the Ore Mountains, in the foothills of the Ore Mountains. It's a mining area, and they and Lita and her father live on the edges of town in a little a small cabin that used to be someone's vacation house that was assigned to them when they were sent to live in this town for Lita's father to work as a mechanic. So these are some of the places that inspired Torch. And Our Beautiful Darkness. I'd like to talk a little bit about this book. As a translator, I gravitate toward projects that explore history. And many years ago, I wrote a chapter for a book. It was like a reference book on the Angolan Civil War. And so I researched and I learned about the Angolan Civil War. And this was basically, again, Angola, along with other countries, several other countries in Africa, including Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, Sao Tome and Principe, and Cabo Verde, were colonies of Portugal under the dictatorship. And when the dictatorship fell in the Carnation Revolution of 1974, it was a military coup, prompted in large part by the military just really getting tired of fighting these colonial wars in Africa. They'd taken a lot of casualties, and a lot of young men had already fled the country to avoid the draft. So after that government fell, the new democratic government that came to power after April 25th, 1974, liberated all of the African colonies, and they all became independent countries. In the case of Angola, it was a country that was bordering, along with Mozambique, was bordering South Africa. And South Africa at that time was under the apartheid regime, and South Africa moved into the void, along with, unfortunately, the United States at that time, moved into the void created by the withdrawal of Portugal from the African colonies, and supported a right-wing guerrilla movement that fought for over 20 years, well, almost 30 years, fought a guerrilla war against the MPLA, which was the in Angola. It was the governing party, the MPLA, and it was a Marxist party. So it became, again, a proxy war during the Cold War, and the Angolan Civil War really only ended when communism fell and there was no more proxy war. So I'd always been fascinated by that whole period of, during the Angolan Civil War. And when I lived in Lisbon, one year I went to a bookstore called Ler Devagar. It's in if you've ever been to Lisbon, it's in the LX Factory is the name of the area. And this is it's one of the great bookstores of the world. And while I was there, I saw this book. I mean, you look at the book, Uma Escuridão Bonita, and it just catches your eye. I mean, it's just an absolutely beautiful book. And I wanted to translate it. This was 2019. I brought the book back. I showed it to Claudia Bedrick. It was at that time that she had created the Unruly Books imprint for Enchanted Lion to publish young adult books. But then the pandemic hit. And so I didn't hear anything from her. And I'd forgotten all about this book that I had given her. And, I had some personal issues. My husband passed away in 2021. And then a couple of years ago, she contacted me and said, that book you gave me, I want to translate it. And this book is, by, as was mentioned earlier, is by one of the great writers from Angola, Onjaki, who was born and grew up during the Angolan Civil War. And it's the story of a night that the power goes out. And it's set in Luanda, which is the capital of Angola, and is very far from the actual fighting, but it's not far in the minds of the two characters, the young man and the girl that he wants to kiss. It's not far from them, both because the light has gone out, but also because her father was killed in the war. And in a way, she feels that her eyes used to sparkle. And it was like the light had gone out in her eyes before, after her father died. And they start talking, and he wants to make her happy. And I don't want to tell you anymore. I am not going to spoil this book, but you really need to read it. So it was an unusual project. A lot of people, when I talk about translation, a lot of people ask me, well, how do you become a translator, and how do you get assigned, or how do you, where do the books come from? And in a lot of cases, such as in my first translation, the publisher contacted me. It's actually not that common for a translator to bring a book to a publisher and convince the publisher to take it on. But if you are really passionate about a book, the truth is those are the most, I feel those are really the most impactful translations. And Three Balls of Wool, which really, if it hadn't been for Three Balls of Wool, I never would have written Torch. And Pardalita, which was also a book that I brought to Lyn Querido. I was hired as a reader for that book, and I loved that book. And I went to Lyn Querido. I said, "You have to publish this book." And even though they had a change in editor, I had to convince 2 editors to publish it. And it ended up winning a Batchelder Award. And then Our Beautiful Darkness, that is on this wonderful, outstanding international books list. And I look forward to translating more books by Onjaki, and both writing and translating more books that make a difference. So I thank you all for listening and look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much today. That was really a wonderful presentation. I suspect we all learned a great deal. And there is time for some questions. So I hope at this point that we only have one question that's been posted, and it was posted to everyone. But I would love to hear our speakers address it as well. But please continue to post your questions in the chat or the question and answer box. And the question, which was from Victor Santos, it's a long one. I'm going to read the entire thing. Please, all of you who have presented, feel free to respond. Many world-renowned picture book creators who are extremely admired in specific areas of the world and in critical circles have never had one of their books published in the USA. One astounding example of the books by amazing Polish illustrator Iwona Chmielewska, and I may have mispronounced that, winner of no less than 3 Bologna Ragazzi Awards, a 4-time finalist of the Hans Christian Andersen Award, and once again nominated for the Hans Christian Andersen Award now for 2026. Do you think that this is an example of the USA picture book market being more commercially driven and less refined than the picture book market in many other countries around the world, especially Europe? I feel like there's often a lack of picture book literacy in the US by many readers. So many publishers prefer to play it safe and not publish beautiful, innovative, and off the beaten path picture books. So we would love to hear your responses.
I would say yes. I agree with that. I'm going to write down Iwona Chmielewska's name and see if I can find somebody who translates from Polish and is passionate enough, to bring those books to the to publishers who do publish innovative picture books. And I've got to say, there are a few. They are all small presses. Enchanted Lion. I was impressed with them even before I became a translator for them. And it really has been an honor for me to be a translator for Enchanted Lion. Lyn Querido is another one, although Lyn Querido does not publish a lot of picture books. Enchanted Lion really is kind of one of the top publishers of picture books. North-South Books and Greystone is another really good one that publishes innovative books. I brought another book, War, A Guerra, to Claudia. And again, it was a very little text. it was really a story told in pictures and very and innovative, and really wanted her to take that one. But by the time she contacted the publisher in Portugal, they'd already sold the rights to Greystone. So that was the one that got away. But yes, there are these books. And I think one of the problems is that there is a lack of picture book literacy. But I also feel that reviewers are really, they don't review small press books as much as they should. And they tend to follow along the beaten path and, and review the more commercial books and give starred reviews to the more commercial books.
Okay,
So that's one of the reasons the OIB list is really so important.
thank you, Lynn. Robert has an interesting question as well. He asked, is there an effort to have more dual language books that have both the original and the translated language?
Can I just jump in here? I don't know that I have a real answer to that question, Robert, in terms of is there more? I just want to highlight from a librarian perspective, we obviously here in New York City serve an incredibly diverse population, and thinking about dual language books and books in world languages or some of these titles in their original language is something our collections team thinks about quite a lot, and something that I think is a really important question is both how do we bring these titles in translation, and then also how do we honor the original languages and the original titles and make those accessible as well. So just underscoring that I appreciate that question, and from my perspective, in a large urban area, it's something at a library, it's something we're thinking about quite a lot.
Yeah. By the way, I just saw where Avery listed, and I do want to highlight them, the Yonder imprint of Restless Books is another innovative publisher of picture books.
Thank you, Lynn. And Rachel. Okay, Esther has a question. Lynn, this one is for you. She says, what criteria do you usually take for deciding to translate a children's book in a culture to English or vice versa? Are there any cultural or other values we need to consider at first?
I would say for a book that I choose to translate, which is not all the books that I end up translating, because I would say about half of the books I've translated were, and maybe a little more than half, if I consider books from other publishers that I've translated besides Enchanted Lion, that they are books that the publisher has already decided to translate, and then they just come in and ask me to translate. But the ones that I fall in love with and then go and pitch to the publisher, they have to be books I fall in love with. And in my case, that's probably going to be a historical book. And like right now, we're looking at, I'm hoping that this very funny middle grade book by Onjaki will be my next project with Unruly Books. But it's set in Angola a few years earlier than Our Beautiful Darkness and has some of the same characters. So yeah, I think any translator really, if you're going to go to a publisher, the translator really has to fall in love with the book, which, they will do based on what they like and, what their interests are, because it's like with writing a book, you're going to be spending, when you translate a book, you're just going to be spending a lot of time with that project.
Okay, thank you. Okay, another interesting question. How can we encourage shocking cultural aspects of life children experience normally abroad to be accepted in North America? For example, the barbed wire and self-immolation Lynn mentioned, and aspects in folk tales in other countries that contain things like the old grim fairy tales did, like animals eating their mothers.
I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that we need more books that are set in other countries and get away. I mean, to get away from the single story. One of the reasons we need more is that we don't have the book from a particular place, because when you only have one book from a particular place or culture, then it's going to create stereotypes, because that's the only story you have. And that's why, and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has a wonderful article. It's kind of a classic now, The Dangers of the Single Story. So that's why it's important to have a lot of books. And for me as an author, for instance, you gave the example of Torch with the self-immolation of Jan Palach, which, by the way, he was influenced by the Buddhist monks in Vietnam. Is that as an author, I also feel a need to promote other books that are set in the same place and time, to make sure that people get a wide view. So for instance, I will recommend books by Ruta Sepetys, who writes a lot about World War II and the Cold War, with the book set in Romania. And there's a new book, a verse novel set in East Germany before the fall of the Berlin Wall, Sherry Green's Song of Freedom, Song of Dreams. So there are other books out there, and I think it's important to read more of them and publish more of them, so there isn't a single story.
Would I be able to just jump in really briefly,
Sure.
which is something I wanted to highlight. I said something in the overview of USBBY, and again, just coming from working with kids in a large urban city with many immigrants and folks who speak other languages, that, something that I think is a good thing to keep in mind is that, cultural aspects of life, children experience abroad. Actually, there's a lot of those children who are here now in the United States as well, and who are, have family who live abroad, and who that is a shared culture, and actually talking about these, experiences that happen in other countries might actually be very intimately connected to their lives. And so having that be a part of the books that are available to read can also be affirming, as well as that, that the mirrors and windows truly apply across international borders is important, I think.
Okay, Ross is asking a question, and he says, are these books available only in the US? I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to in terms of these books, but I'm going to throw that question out there. Does somebody want to address that?
I think they're available in all of the, they're all English-speaking markets. I'd love to have, Torch translated into another language, but so far it has not happened. But yes, they're available, for instance, in the UK and anywhere and in Canada.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or in the questions and answers. But Lynn did say that she would be, well, we may have one. Let me just look at this. No, Brenda's putting this a comment, it's not a question, but Lynn did indicate that she would be open to answering questions by email if you would like to get in touch with her. So since we have no more questions, we're gonna be closing up. Wait, there is one.
There was another question I noticed that was in the chat, and I noticed it because it's kind of near and dear to me, because I support small presses, but also my co-author of Moonwalking has self-published a lot of books. Are self-published books eligible for any of these lists?
A lot of times they're not. So we've had lots of debate about it. Every once in a while, yes, if it meets our criteria, we'll look at it. Honestly, we just don't get a lot of them. So, and if we do get them, sometimes they really don't meet the criteria. So I think it's important to, as we think through smaller publishers or voices that could be blocked, like so maybe a self-publishing avenue might be an important avenue for a book to come across. It might be important to consider, but our committee so far has not really had a lot on our list, just be honest.
Okay, and Jacqueline says, have you had to face banning of some of the books on these lists?
Oh, yes. So, and honestly, as a committee, we think about that. So when we're, unfortunately, I mean, we get concerned about, are we creating a list of books that won't be used in classrooms and are they going to get blocked? So we try really hard to not think about that. We really try to think through, our criteria and the list. But honestly, who wants to create a list of books that are just not going to be used? But we are really trying to think about that, and put books out there. On the list that just came out, I can tell you at least 4 or 5, I believe that are probably on the list. We're really trying hard for the list to be counter narrative so that the books can sort of speak against what's going on. But, it's tricky. Like, I'm just being really honest.
Okay, another question, is there an emphasis on promoting diversity and honoring multiple languages to counter the anti-DEI moves by the current US government?
I would say yes. One of the ways that I've been so far, I don't know if I want to say this. One of the ways that I've been thinking about this as I sort of think through teaching through the cracks or using these books is if you use an international or global framing, for whatever reason, that framing seems to be more powerful than a diversity or equity lens. Now, this is highly problematic for like lots of reasons. I mean, you all are nodding, which is making me feel happier. But I think, like for example, I run a conference that promotes literature books. And because it's a global conference, so far it's been welcomed and affirmed versus, sort of some of the attacks on DEI. But I would love to hear, Rachel, you wanna add in on that?
I mean, I think that's actually just the heart of what we're trying to do with the Outstanding International Books and has always been sort of the core of the mission, which maybe I also want to hand it to like Wendy or to Brenda to talk about sort of the history of this, because whether in the current climate or at any time, there's, since Lyn-Miller-Lachmann founded USBBY and before that, the sense of the importance of bringing other sort of cultures and languages and experiences, across borders is really critical. And I think just even more critical now. I would highlight what Jeannie was saying about the framing and the global and international framing does tend to really stand up in contexts where maybe DEI would possibly not in the same way. And I would hope that the lists that we're putting together and putting out in the world are just themselves really actively serving as a counter and showcasing what's possible, like in shared understanding.
Yeah, I think both of these lists are just really important and sort of speaking back. I just want to make sure like that you understand like we're not necessarily, um thinking through the banned book part. We really do want to be brave and create powerful book lists that really speak to the amazing gifts of, lots of different people and groups. Like we do think that's really important. But we also, a lot of us are educators and we have to sort of think through sort of the complexities. some of the groups actually are based in where I'm from. So, you know, like we do, I think as educators, we have to talk about the complexities and that it can be, you know, nerve-wracking, but it really is important to take a stand. But I think sometimes we have to talk, this is not the frame for this, but I mean, maybe another session on sort of the complexity of how you use these books in ways that sort of stands as that counter narrative to these book bans. It's tricky. Like it's easy to say just use the book, but you know, we have to be sort of really thoughtful in how we think about these issues.
Okay, thank you, Jeannie. And I think we're just about out of time. But I'd like to kind of echo what someone said in the chat, that this has been a great session, very informative. And I'd like to thank all the presenters for joining us this evening. And I'd also like to thank the audience for joining in, listening, and sharing your questions. And just a couple of things. We have posted in the chat a link to handouts, so I hope you'll take advantage of that. And we also want to remind you that the closed captioned recording of this event will be available within 5 days, and you're going to be able to access that at literacyworldwide.org/digital events. So be on the lookout for that. And once again, thank you ever so much for joining us, and have a truly great evening. Thank you.